Every business has routine transactions, such as monthly bills, insurance payments, rent payments. Reoccurring transactions eliminate the job of re-entering the same details every time you enter that transaction. The dollar amount of the transaction does not need to be the same each time in order to use reoccurring transactions. We're going to go through a few examples of using reoccurring transactions. I'm going to bring up the payment screen. And we have a vendor called Wireless Cell Service that we pay our cell phone bill to. And let's click recall to bring back the last transaction that we've done. You can either do that or you can fill out the grid of how you want to enter that transaction. But once you have this grid filled out with all the details that you want, we have a notation in here, and there is a distribution assigned in this particular case. But when you have all the details, then click the reoccurring button down at the bottom of the screen. And we'll want to give this a description. We're just going to call this cell phone. It fills in the grid with the accounts that you entered in the transaction screen. You can't add from this screen, but it will display all of the accounts that you used in the grid. For every account, you'll have an option to use a calculation type, a percent, or fixed amount. If you do percent, then you'll want to put in what percentage you want to this particular account. You can have more than one account in the transaction, and then you might want to divide it with a percent to each one of them. Or if this were the same amount that you want to enter every time the transaction's done, then you can use fixed amount and enter that dollar value. In this case, we're going to do a percent and leave it at 100%. And down at the bottom of the screen, you can also indicate how you want this to behave. So you can set this as a default reoccurring transaction, meaning every time I use wireless cell service, is this a transaction that I want to fill in my grid? And the bottom checkbox is set wireless cell service to automatically load the default reoccurring transaction, meaning when I select wireless cell service at the top of the screen, do I want it to automatically populate the grid with my information? If I don't, then I'll be able to click my reoccurring button over at the far right of my vendor line and select to use that reoccurring transaction. We're going to go ahead and click Save. And I'm going to clear this so we can start over with our vendor. And now you'll see that the little button at the right is yellow, indicating that there are reoccurring transactions assigned to this vendor. And it fills out my grid with my transaction that I had assigned because I selected to load the default reoccurring transaction for this name. Up at the top of the screen, we have different options that can be used for your different vendors. You could select to leave the transaction empty all the time, or you could select to recall the last transaction for this name, which would be the same as clicking the recall button, but it would automatically, when you select the vendor, go back and recall that transaction and populate the grid. Or you can select the option load the default reoccurring transaction, meaning it's going to use this reoccurring that we just created here as the default and populate the grid with that information. Down at the bottom of the screen are some buttons. If you had more than one reoccurring for this particular vendor, which you can have several reoccurring, but one of them would be set as a default. But if there were several different things I did with this particular vendor, I might have a couple of different reoccurring for this particular one, and then I could select the one I want and click Select. If you need to get rid of a reoccurring transaction that you've created, you can highlight and click the Delete button. And this button will toggle between selecting just the items that are assigned to this vendor or giving me all of my different reoccurring transactions that I have in the system. So that will just toggle between that and then close. So that filled out our grid if we go over and put in the amount for this transaction, let's say it's 140 this time, it automatically populated my grid with the amount because I have 100% to this account, and I'm ready to click my Save button, and I'm done with this transaction. Now let's do another transaction. We have a online toners and cartridges company that we buy our toners from. And when we buy those toners, part of that is going to go to our market supply marketing expense account, and part of it's going to go to our office supplies. So we're going to set up a reoccurring. Even before I put in the amounts, what I can do is go to my reoccurring again and put in here toner supplies. That's what I'm buying. And every time I do this, part of it's going to marketing, part of it's going to office. I just want to divide it up. So I'm going to say it's percent for each one of them, and I'm just going to divide it 50% to each. So I don't have to worry about dividing that when I enter the transaction. It's going to do it for me. I'm going to set it as my default, and I'm going to set it to automatically populate. So I'm going to click Save. Let's clear this again, and we're going to do online toners, and I'm going to go over to the amount and put in $300. And it automatically filled in my grid with 150 each, and I didn't have to do that calculation. And we're ready again to click Save on that transaction. There we go. Now I have an insurance company, Rural Insurance, and I already have a reoccurring that I had assigned for that one. It's called Insurance, and it is set up to automatically populate the amounts because in my reoccurring I set it to fixed amount for each one of these. My insurance bill is the same amount every month, and I set the calculation type for fixed amount. So when I do this, I click Save, and it's asking me if I want to make changes. If you do need to make any changes in your reoccurring because perhaps my insurance bill changed a little bit and I changed the amount, if you click Save, it will tell you that you are saving a reoccurring. Do you want to continue to do that? And I can say yes. If you actually wanted another variation of the same reoccurring, then I could go to Save As, give it a little bit different description, and I would have another copy of that without disturbing the one that I actually originally started with. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And again, I'm ready to save this transaction. All I did was I selected my vendor, filled out the grid with all my details that I had in before. I'm ready to click Save. And you can use one as a combination. So let's do one of those also. I have a membership club, and in that membership club, I think I have a recall here. Here we go. In my membership club, part of it's going to dues and subscriptions for my warehouse membership club, and part of it is employee benefit. And on my reoccurring, I want to set this up for my dues and subscriptions. I'm going to say that is always going to be a set amount for the company for dues and subscriptions of $200. And with the rest of it, which varies depending upon how many employees are signed up, 100% of that is going to go to my employee benefit expense. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and that changed my I'm sorry, I should have given this a new name. Let's give this membership club and save that. It was warning me that I had used insurance, and I want this under membership club, a new reoccurring. So I'm going to save that, clear it, and now check this out for warehouse membership club. I'm going to put in an amount of, let's say, $440, and it put the $200 to my dues and subscriptions, which was that fixed amount, and 100% of the remaining went to the employee benefit expense. So again, it did that calculation for me I didn't have to do anything but put in my vendor name and my amount, and I'm ready to save that transaction again. So those are different ways that you can use your reoccurring transactions to help you with your entries of doing those routine type of transactions. Every entry screen will have its own set of reoccurring transactions. So if I go over to my vendor invoice and I pick that vendor of rural insurance, it didn't fill anything out. And if I click my button for reoccurring, I do not have anything because we did not save any reoccurring transactions from this particular screen. Your vendor invoice screen can have its own set of those entries that you're using in the vendor invoice screen, as well as all the other data entry screens, your customer invoices, your receipts. Reoccurring can be used in any of those transaction screens.